Hi, I am Jeffrey Wernick, and welcome to another Fein Points. As usual, we have both Bruce here, of course, um, and Ryan, and we'd like to welcome a new member of the panel, Dennis Kucinich. And this week, I think the topic that I would like to start off with is that I had read prior to coming on here that John Roberts has ruled that this person from the FTC that's been fired, then told, then unfired, then fired again, then unfired again. Robert said she's now permanently fired, uh, but that is still there's still the issue of whether what the executive power is with respect to firing people without cause from agencies that have been designed by Congress to be independent agencies while still under the executive branch. There were agencies designed to have a nonpartisan or bipartisan governance structure. So I think when people talk about, I want to frame this as I like to usually do, and then open it up for. I'll pass it on to Bruce and Dennis and Ryan for their comments. But I'd like to start off by saying, if we think about the constitutional design, the original design for the Constitution, one is the system of checks and balances were well established. The founders thought very carefully about what powers should be delegated to the executive branch, what powers should be delegated to the judicial branch, what powers should be delegated to the legislative branch. Uh, the Constitution really never, is kind of silent, but it should be evident. It should be self-evident to me, and I think it should be self-evident to everyone. Is that when you design a system of checks and balances, and you have that systems of checks and balances, in order to preserve a system where there's competition for power, and because really what they wanted to avoid was a state of tyranny, and they defined tyranny as basically circumstances where one party controlled every branch of government. So it seems obvious to me that any that really no power, unless for a very specific purpose for a limited time, should be delegated from any party, from any branch to another branch, without a constitutional amendment restructuring the relationship between the systems of checks and balances. And we also know from the founding period of time the idea, and if people just go back to reading Washington's farewell address, that maybe how the indispensable American, according to so many, and I would agree with that assessment. He gave a warning to us and advice to us. One advice was our relationship with the world should be based upon commerce, and we should not get involved, in entanglements overseas. So that was one piece of advice. We should not get into debt. If we get into debt because of extraordinary circumstances, we pay off that debt quickly. You don't pass off debt from one generation to another debt. And the other thing was a major warning, significant warning about the danger of political parties. Okay. The founders did not like democracy. They felt democracy was mob rule, and they thought a worse form of mob rule and one of the greatest evils. And this was expressed by George Washington, by John Adams, even Alexander Hamilton, Thomas Jefferson, about how evil a process being run, a system government being run where basically people put party above country, and that it became a partisan process. So the initial design was, and if you think about it, the presidential election, the president was the first going to, who got the most of votes. The vice president was the second most votes. So the president was not choosing the vice president. Okay, and the expectation was that members of the legislature would all be free agents. So think independent thinkers, people thinking for themselves, not someone who formed a block. An example we can see right now is the Republican Party war against Thomas Massey, because Massey dares to think for himself. So we have a political process that discourages people. And I think Dennis knows that also, because Dennis experienced that within his own party, as Dennis was a very independent person in his political career, both I guess mayor you were, and member of Congress. So I think the contemplation was that everybody would be independent and people would place their constitutional responsibilities first and foremost, and not party identity and falling in line and voting, with a block. So, given that context, you know, do you think the founders would want a political party to control every regulatory agency and the people that ran regulatory agencies? So there would be no such thing as an independent person in government. That basically we did have tyranny of the majority. And the question is, do you believe because that's the argument now being made by the Trump team. The Trump team says we won an election. Votes have consequences, so that basically we get to do whatever we want to do because we won an election. Now, they didn't let Biden do that, but that's what they're saying now under Trump. And I also want to remind people, Trump did not get 50% of the vote. So he did not get a majority of the people who voted. He did not get a majority of the people. So that's not the expression of the majority. And the Constitution design, specifically, one rejects the concept of tyranny of the majority, but that's the argument made by the Trump administration now. And soon the courts will be making a judgment on whether they also endorse tyranny of the majority. So, Bruce,
yeah.
I hand it off to you and for your comment.
Okay, well, thank you, and I welcome Dennis. I want to tell our listeners, Dennis is one of the few in Congress who epitomize courage. Whether you agree or disagree, without courage, no other virtues are possible. And it's a regret that Dennis is not in there. We desperately need him. And I want to salute Dennis, a statesman of the highest sort that would have been welcome in the Constitutional Convention. And thank you for participating, Dennis. We really, really appreciate it. A couple things I want to start out with. The whole idea of separation of powers and checks and balances was to protect liberty, due process of law. And so any arrangement that kinds to check limitless power is automatically presumed constitutional, because the goal here is not to aggrandize government, it's to aggrandize liberty, the march of the mind. Liberty was our glory, John Quincy Adams wrote on July 4th, 1821 to Congress. And the idea of liberty was very prevalent even with the conservative court in the 1930s, when Franklin Roosevelt was asserting all sorts of power, much of it very widely or limitless and delegated by Congress. And the decision that you referred to, Humphrey's executor, it was unanimous. It was a unanimous vote. Everyone agreed, yeah, this was a way to check Roosevelt's power, to require that in multi-member agencies, there be a fragmented political coloration to try to at least diminish the extremism comes when you have no checks whatsoever. Now, this is a decision that's almost a century old. And traditionally, the court has taken the view, well, we may have got cases wrong, but if we've had institutions growing up around the cases, we say, listen, you can have a constitutional amendment, but otherwise we're just going to let the precedents stay. Unfortunately, this court has kind of used precedents like they're bowling 10 pins and you just throw them out whenever you feel like it. No matter how long the precedent has existed, no matter how long the country has declined to even debate a constitutional amendment to overturn the precedent, you got it wrong. Okay, we'll throw it out. But I want to underscore what I had mentioned before we began the program. We have turned psychologically and intellectually into an empire infrastructure. You can't run empires without a Caesar. So year by year, the president approaches more and more. Julius Caesar is kind of the symbol of limitless executive power. And it's not limited to independent agencies. And it's the war power that the court, there are very few provisions in the Constitution that are as clear in their purpose and meaning than Article 1, Section 8, Clause 11. Only Congress can take us to war, in which every person at the Constitutional Convention said, we cannot have presidents take us to war. We need a deliberative process. President can go in self-defense when being attacked actually attacked, not when you dream about it and you believe a Venezuelan gang is an invader, or unarmed men and women across the Mexican border are armies that are invading the United States, like the Luftwaffe or the Nazis. That only Congress could take us to war. That provision, the clearest perhaps in the Constitution in terms of its purpose and meaning, is thrown out. Presidents go to war, they call anything they want war, and so we will do it on our own, and turns that war power into the power to commit murder, which I believe we did on the high seas against those who were suspected of drug smuggling. And every year it gets worse and worse. It kind of has climbed to a new level with Trump, but it didn't begin with Trump. This idea emerged very, very prominently after 9/11. The president can play prosecutor, judge, jury, and executioner, kill anybody he wants in secret, say this was a terrorist, like the teenage son of Anwar al-Awlaki. That's it. You don't know why they killed him. Oh, we thought it was a danger. I mean, basically, we exist as human beings today at the indulgence of a president who doesn't want to say, okay, I believe you're a terrorist in secret. I'm going to kill you, take you out. I don't have to tell anybody else. If you want to know why I did it, I'll say it's classified information, a political question, nobody knows about it. That is where we are today. That the Trade Commission issue is one, but it's much, much larger. And I think Dennis can tell you, even in his time in Congress, they're already surrendering the power. But now it's utterly ridiculous. The Congress basically is no different than the Senate under Caesar Augustus, an ornament and nothing more.
Dennis, you have comments?
Well, of course. Bruce, you and I worked together during those days after 9/11 to try to stop the abuse of the Constitution. And I am so grateful to be on this show with you and Jeffrey and Ryan. As a member of Congress, I saw Congress's willingness to cede their essential power under Article 1, Section 8, Clause 11, to take this country from a position of non-war to war. And the Congress did that often without so much as a peep. I had the honor of filing lawsuits against 3 different presidents on this point. And what the courts came down, federal courts came down to it was this, that Congress, if it appropriates the money to pursue a conflict, that is the key issue, the appropriation of the money. And that the courts have essentially whittled away at Congress's power under Article 1. However, Congress always has had the chance to be able to take the money away from any kind of a conflict and end it. And it won't do that. So we have a vitiation of the Article 1 powers. And remember, Congress was first among equals. Article 1, Article 2, the executive. And as a result, what we have here is the president gaining more power. It's no surprise to see this unitary executive theory materialize into an omnipotent presidency, which can only lead us into more conflict, can diminish our commercial strength as a nation, and essentially will, leading us directly into tyranny. This has been a problem under Democrat and Republican administrations. And Bruce, as you pointed out, that a president who can essentially declare the ability to be judge, jury, and executioner over anybody is a presidency which is out of control, and which there needs to be a new understanding and a re-education of what the Constitution is about. It's about co-equality. It was about an intricate set of checks and balances, and those are all being destroyed now. And as a result, we move towards a Caesar-like executive, which is not what the founders contemplated. George Washington himself didn't want to be a king.
Yeah. And I would just add the lunacy, Dennis, of arguing about the appropriations power substitute. Remember, if the war power was to be decided by the appropriations, why would you write in Article 1, Section 8, Clause 11? The declare war clause then becomes superfluous. It wasn't.
Exactly.
And
Exactly.
so it's because there's a cardinal principle. You don't interpret, a document to be redundant. They were very, very concise in what they are writing. And nobody ever conceded the appropriations power was a substitute for a declaration of war. George Washington, the first president, said, because the war power is entrusted to Congress, no offensive use of the military can be undertaken unless Congress has deliberated on it and authorized it. He didn't say, well, they can do with a war power through the appropriations process. That's just a latter day assertion. That's totally counter-historical, counter-logical.
Before we go to Ryan, I just want to interject one thing. And this discussion that we're having is occurring when the executive branch has renamed the Department of Defense, which we always know was a misnomer, but has named it the Department of War. Yeah. So this creates a war consciousness, which does violence to the Constitution. And particularly, as you point out, Bruce, the Article 1, Section 8, Clause 11 is unambiguous. And it can't be defeated by some court decision that says, well, if they give the money or take away the money, they're not at war. So thank you. And Ryan, look forward to hearing what you have to say.
Well, thank you. And I think we all know that it was obviously originally called the Department of War. And I think it's an interesting point that most Americans don't understand, is that it's all about the framing, right? As you're kind of highlighting, it's the mentality that goes along with it. And they're just shifting back into that mentality. And that's very interesting. So what Bruce points out often, that today especially, and that even the founding fathers warned us about, that we would drift towards where we are, and that the worst people gravitate towards the power. And I think that we've gotten to that position where that is the reality, as you both know, and Dennis as well. Now, that my opinion is that I see this as, largely one power structure. There's obviously moving parts and different flavors and different partisan views, but from the real power structure, I think this is, they see themselves as one power structure. And I think what we're watching is this moment by moment, movement by movement rationalization in the minds of people who may not understand, who may not care, rationalizing what we're talking about, an authoritarian government from the top down. And I think, look at immigration and deportations. What were they doing? Rushing to the outcome without even going through the process and hoping we didn't care. And then dealing with all the fallout. Every example we see this, from the Venezuelan boat attacks, all these different examples, it's about pushing that envelope, right? And I think this is really important to think about. You mentioned, like with Roosevelt, that you get into like the politicization overlap of it. And like the judges part of it that Jeffrey started with is that, you could argue even all the way back then that, that there was a need to check his power. But even then, I guarantee there were people within that had political motivations and that, oh, okay, I want to check his power for other reasons, or that I want to, that existed then too. And so the thing is that today you've driven to this point to where they rationalize these changes, and, like with the judges, right? So they're screaming political judges and activism, which is probably in some degree true, but they're doing the same thing back. And so it's like, is that they're right in doing the wrong thing because they're fighting the wrong side? It all is just this rationalization to where all of the power continues to drive very quickly into what I think they've always been largely, and are now kind of just showing out front, which is an authoritarian control structure. I think that's what it really comes down to. And I think that all of these things, like they're trying to diminish the last, kind of remnants of what people understand the inherent reality of the Constitution to be. And if they can push us beyond that and get people in political positions of power to argue that we either shouldn't care or that we should break it to put it back in place, neither of which lead to where we want, then we'll lose in essence. And so that's this battle right now.
I view this as a counter-revolution against July 4th, 1776.
I would agree with that.
That's exactly what it is. We now entrust the president with more power than King George III asserted over the American colonialists. You can just read the complaints against King George III that are in the Declaration. They're nothing compared to what we have against Trump or even prior presidents, asserting power to kill us at any time he wants, throw due process out the window, spend money that's not been authorized by Congress, or to not spend money that Congress has appropriated, go to war whenever he feels like it, suspend due process, habeas corpus, call anything a national emergency. Like one immigrant coming across the border and not legally, then we have a national emergency indistinguishable from war. I mean, this is deranged. This is no longer law. This is just ruled by AK-47s. And that's what we have at present. And I want to underscore, the courts are not going to save us. They will not do impeachment, say they back down. They can put speed bumps in the road is all. If Congress doesn't assert its impeachment power, we're done. We might as well forget the 56 signers of the Declaration who signed their death warrants for liberty, and we squandered it all because we weren't going to keep the republic that Ben Franklin said we had when he emerged from the Constitutional Convention. It's as simple as that. And the problem is not just the members of Congress. It's us, the citizens. We have to stand up and say, this is not what we want. We're not going to return people to Congress who aren't discharging their constitutional obligations to uphold and defend the Constitution, not see it whittled away and raped in public view and do nothing. And that's what we see right now. I mean, I don't even have words to describe it. And I go back, Dennis, you remember I was there August 9th, 1974, the helicopter, Nixon's gone. You remember he tells David Frost, if the president does it, that means it's not illegal. No, that isn't who we are. That's 50 years ago. The high water mark, citizen involvement, we got involved. Watergate, no, you don't do the plumbers, we don't do burglaries, don't do obstruction. We have none of that resistance today among the citizens. Complete zero. I'll go on TikTok, I'll do some other trivial thing that keeps me from being bored. But there's no citizen engagement. So we lost it all.
Can I have one quick thing on that, Bruce? And I feel like I tend to be the pushback on this point when it comes up, but I get a sense, and I could be wrong on the full picture of it, that it's not as clear as that. Is that today? I agree that that's the direction we're leaning in, but I think a lot more people over the last, let's just say, so many years have started to see this, and the point is they're just not highlighted in that false image we're given of the majority, right? The mainstream over here, the mainstream alternative media over here, pointing at each other, acting like they're the majority on either side. That's what they all say. That's what they all say. And there's a huge moving underbelly. I know, because I'm a part of this, independent media sphere of people that aren't being pointed to in that conversation and don't get acknowledged when the larger conversation is had. And I think it's a larger number than we think. And I'll leave it there. I know it's undefined, but I think we should have hope there's more people out there than we realize today that aren't.
Okay, it's a hope. It's not that Sam Johnson described it, triumph of hope over experience about second marriages. But listen, the difference is this. Saturday Night Massacre, 30,000 telegrams that you got to pay $2 to Western Union came into Congress screaming and yelling, right? Nothing. Today you press an email. Go up there. They're not overwhelmed with the citizens campaigning and screaming and yelling. That's just not happening. That's the difference. I mean, I remember Watergate hearings. You could go into a grocery store, a barber shop, everyone was fixated. John Dean, Alex Butterfield, Mitchell, Haldeman, Ehrlichman, hey, they were engaged and they had their views and some people came forward. You don't even have a congressional hearing today. Nothing. It's amazing. I mean, anyway, having lived through the two eras now and then, Ryan, there's a huge difference.
Oh, I completely agree with that. And I would even say it's probably largely by design that, people like I can speak to that myself, like somebody who I don't feel at this point, and this, we've had this conversation before, that our vote translates to the outcome. Not to say that's not important in a represented society. It's paramount, but I don't think we have that. And so I think that you can get to a place where people then start to go, well, why am I going to do that if they've created a system in which that no longer makes a difference? Not to say we shouldn't, Bruce, because I agree with you, but I understand why people can fall in that trap of hopelessness. It's learned hopelessness. And even though they want to change, and so we it's an interesting point to think about that. And I'm with you. Hope should not be what we're driving with here. But I think at the end of the day, I do see more people moving in that, which is a good thing, Bruce. People are hearing what you're saying. It is getting some traction. And I hope we see that more.
Ryan, from my point of view, I think we've seen with the polarization of the politics of this country, which has been extreme over the last few presidential races. With that polarization has come a trivialization of the constitutional issues that are at stake, and with that leads to anesthetizing of the public. We're not seeing a response because people are lulled into a sense of powerlessness. Right. They can't respond, and as a result, we see the executive, with the help of the Supreme Court, get even more powerful. We say this not just a trend towards, but an entrenchment of an authoritarian approach. Now that, by the way, that's where I think Americans, there'll be a backlash building, because somewhere in our constitutional memory, as individuals, we have this sense of freedom. And when people really get that their freedoms have been impaired, I think you'll see a backlash, and that could have real electoral implications. We're not there right now, though.
You know, I like the way Bruce expressed it, and I wish I entitled the piece I wrote that I shared with all three of you over the weekend. I think it was the counter revolution against the Declaration of Independence. I think that's an accurate statement and very well said. As both, I think, as all of you know, Ryan, Bruce, and Dennis, I shared a piece with you how ironic it felt that the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence is going to be, they're planning a quote a big celebration of it when Trump administration, when Trump is probably the president most singularly responsible for, you know, the complete destruction of those principles of the Declaration of Independence. And Trump probably would have been a loyalist at that time if he was around. So not very sympathetic to that cause. There's nothing in his personality or his politics that indicates anything other than that. I mean, he's made his own statements that he's not bound by the Constitution, and the Constitution basically is an irrelevant document because the only clause that's relevant is the clause that says he can do whatever the fuck he wants to do. So pardon my language, but that's basically his interpretation of the Constitution. It's a very simple interpretation. I can do what I want, and I have total immunity, and nobody can stop me. Okay?
Do you think he really thinks that? Or do you think he's just saying that? Like, I thought about that the other day. It's like, do you think he really believes that, or is that just his argument to kind of just?
I think that's the way he's lived his whole life. So why do you think he doesn't believe it? That's how he's lived his whole life.
That's fair.
Why would you think he'd be any different than the person he has been his entire life? Okay, his entire life is a life of entitlement, immunity. Okay, and feeling that the law just doesn't apply to him. That's why anytime the law attempts to apply to him, he calls it a witch hunt or something else. But he didn't have all the power he has now to strike back at those who have attempted to do him wrong according to his own criteria. So his whole life and how he runs his own organization, okay, the hierarchy is this.
And let me just remind everybody,
and there's everyone else.
Jeffrey, this is an exact quote, Donald Trump, July 23rd, 2019, quote, "Then I have Article 2, where I have the right to do anything I want as president." Is there anything ambiguous about that statement? He's a king.
That's kind of why I asked that. It's like, I don't feel like he's, you know, I think Trump is not as like brilliant as people try to make him out to be, but I also don't think he's as dumb in many cases as people make him out to be. I just don't feel like, I mean, he must, like, there must be somebody in a circle that's like, hey, that's not actually true. You know, like, I think it's them just kind of pushing what they want you to think, you know?
I think I shared with you the video of the big tech elite that were out his private dinner. Oh, you're wonderful. You're amazing. There's never been a president like you. You're the greatest American in the history. You're the greatest person in America. I'm going to invest $20 trillion next year, okay, in America because of you, okay? Everybody comes and kisses the ring. That's what I wrote. You know what I wrote? This is like, I mean, I can imagine the July 4th celebration is he'll have UFC at his at the White House on the where he replaced the lawn with his thing, and he's going to have mixed martial arts. And it's going to be just like, you know, the Romans and the Colosseum, and he's going to amuse the public, you know, like
Brand circuses,
like Nero, things like that, you know. So he sees himself, he acts like royalty, you know, and he expects obsequiousness and fawning towards him. Okay, so that's not been the tradition of really how a president has perceived himself.
So where do we go as a nation then? You know, let's bring this to a point of is there any resolution about what we may be able to do here to call this authoritarian government to an accounting? How do we communicate to the mass public the danger of what's going on? How do we let members of Congress know, and we must let members of Congress know, that the very reason for their presence there, which is to uphold the Constitution, has been essentially wiped away. We cannot get sucked into a whirlpool of hopelessness here by making what are legitimate criticisms of authoritarian, not just instincts, but practices that go against the founders of this country. So I would like to see some discussion.
Well, you're exactly right. There's, you just idle chatter doesn't do anything. Well, what do? I have drafted articles of impeachment. I'm going up on the Hill regularly, meeting with members, typically the Democrat side, because I think you could begin with informal hearings. They don't have to be full committee hearings. The members on the House could join with Durbin or Democrats on the Senate, because it's a huge educational issue. I say we have an epidemic of constitutional illiteracy. That's a real problem. And it begins with Congress themselves. Some of them are partisan, but they really don't know anything about the Constitution either. I mean, we have members on both on the liberal and the conservative side saying we have three chambers of government: the House, the Senate, and the White House. The court's not there. That's a problem. But there's also, I believe, a problem of illiteracy in the civics course. We have to have town meetings. We have to rewrite civics books. I've said all along, we need Congress to fund studies of the history of Congress and its powers. We have all these presidential scholars. Arthur Schlesinger's kind of the top, but we got James McGregor Burns and all these people. They write books on why the presidency is so great. There's no books on Congress. You can't have it. When I'm at Harvard Law School, there's not a single class that has any study of Congress, its powers, why its deliberative process is superior to the executive. Nothing but presidential powers. Yeah, you can get that. So it's got to be, in some sense, a longer range vision. The short term is trying to get Congress involved in understanding what their powers are in asserting, even if it's at this stage with the Republicans, nothing's going to happen until 2026, but at least get the educational mission underway. And I have my offices are literally within 3 minutes walking of the House and Senate office building, so I can go up there regularly. But the other larger issues, we got to change the textbooks. We got to change the culture. It used to be it was Henry Clay and it was Daniel Webster and John Quincy Adams. They were the heroes and the political figures that our country looked to. It wasn't Millard Fillmore. It wasn't the presidency. That doesn't happen anymore. John Quincy Adams left the presidency to become member of the House and did his greatest work in doing out of the gag order that prevented abolitionist petitions from being considered. And he voted against the stupid Mexican-American War. That doesn't happen anyway. It's because the whole culture, the intellectual infrastructure has rotted. And everyone thinks we just need a huge executive that we pray down to. That's an instinct. People like to think of politics in terms of personalities rather than process. But we've got to get over this. The process counts. Congress is a more deliberative body. It has its defects, but at least it's transparent and it doesn't race off into things because they can get a monument built to them if they win a war. So I view Dennis, it's we don't sit idle. We don't just talk on BitChute, but we actually, and every little voice counts. We have involved in this educational process, both at the citizen level and with Congress itself. But in some sense, the larger sense, and I really don't know how to answer this, you got to have people who believe their dignity means, yes, they have to have a role. They're not going to lie down to an executive branch. Self-government is the essence of who they are. If they don't have courage and willing to do that, I really don't know, how can you get the system to work? If the system is so culturally decayed, it can't operate anymore.
Well, your work's exemplary on this, but you raise a point about an informed citizenry. And if you don't have that, all is lost, because any constitutional remedies that would be possible are not understood in any way. It just looks like brickbats. It looks like it's more a symptom of polarization than it is about an underscoring of the system of checks and balances that the founders laid out. So this goes back to, as it does, to education. And if people don't understand what's going on, and generally they don't, there's a lot of confusion. The polarization leads to a lack of understanding, and it it is necessary to return to the town hall, not just by, virtually, but to have people come together again in a sense of exchanging their ideas and their concerns. Because I think that Americans really do believe, they really do have a lot more in common than meets the eye. But polarization sells, it sells ads. So, so it goes back to that town hall, back to the people.
We'll take the school, for example, right? And I agree. I think that as well as this conversation are paramount in this. But like for the school situation, right? So we have the left saying the right is manipulating the school system for their benefit, which they are. The left saying the right says the left's doing that, which they are. And so, but both parent sides of that same parts of the government are instilling people with the same misinformation about the Constitution, right? So it's like, so you get one, like it's what you're saying, Dennis, is you present that obvious solution, but they go, oh, you're just doing that for the other side. It's like, well, it's the same thing with the judges, right? The argument, somebody has to take that brunt. It has to be solved. And it might end up on one person's side if you look at it that way, but it has to happen. And each side then says, well, you're only doing that now because it's them and you wouldn't care before. It's a trap, right? And so it comes down to all of this continuing. And I agree, the town hall is like where it really needs to, that's like a central battleground for this, because one part of it is clearly, as Bruce is saying, we can't just talk. Right. We have to actually take action in real life. We have to do things. But I do think it's paramount to point out that the talking is just as important and can't stop. We tend to do that is where we feel like, well, we have to get into action. But this part of the conversation and keeping people informed about it and discussing this is just as important in my mind as people out there marching through the streets. But it's like you're saying, we need to get in front of real people and have real conversations and see that kind of, snowball, which is what I was saying before. I kind of feel like it's beginning to happen. Maybe not changed yet, but that's why I'm with you on the ground, front line kind of idea. But it's not, it's this, I guess my larger point is it's obviously systemic. It's not just information, because the school system is going to pump out more and more people that's designed to do so that will be like engineered to misunderstand. So how do we get beyond that is kind of the larger point, because all that we said doesn't even really solve the problem of the structure that's doing it.
Yeah, let me give you an example. Several years ago, I took a look at the standards of learning. They call them SOLs in Virginia, Standard of Learning for Civics. Okay. So I wrote a 10 single page critique saying these are all the ways in which you are miseducating their students and believing executive supremacy. And I went through point by point, cited this is what's wrong. This is what's wrong. You're suggesting the president can go to war. I couldn't even, and I sent it to the edit. I didn't even get a response. It's a serious evaluation. No, it's easier to just go ahead and put what's in the book and president can do whatever they want. It's stunning me. You're teachers. You got to put, you're supposed to at least respond. If I'm wrong here, just tell me I'm wrong, but at least we engage.
Nothing. So do you think, Bruce, it's your opinion, but do you think that they know they're wrong and are choosing not to do anything about it because of any number of reasons? Or do you think that they just don't know, which is almost more alarming?
No, I think it's just something in between. I think they don't care. They think, okay, listen, I don't get paid one way or the other. Why do I have to respond to Mr. Fein? So I don't think they think I'm right or wrong. They say nothing's going to happen to them if they ignore me. So why create a problem in their otherwise idle and undisturbed lives, intellectually sleeping?
Why do something when it's easier to do nothing?
Yeah, that's the attitude.
Well, I think there is a lot of pressure on academics and educators to fall in line with what they perceive to be the received wisdom of the higher ups in the establishment, both political and educational. And we see that people who have stepped out of line get punished. They get fired. They get demoted. They get humiliated for their opinions about what is right. What is the right thing to teach? What are the books we should use? And this, education has become another battlefield, whether it's at the elementary level or higher education, as we see the Trump administration's assault on academic freedom, for sure, and on the independence of educational institutions, even private institutions, to be able to teach what they want. If government can't control how people are educated and what they learn, that's part and parcel of not just authoritarianism, but of something much worse.
Yes, it is. But Dennis, I've gone up to Congress so many times and said, You need to appropriate funds to publish scholarly books about Congress. Right now, the citizenry doesn't even believe Congress has a serious role to play. And all the historical tomes about the government, they're all on the presidencies. There's a Kansas, they put series of books on the presidency. I think Arthur Schlesinger headed this group of scholars. And in my judgment, you have to focus on what are the institutional advantages of a deliberative body like Congress over the executive branch. Transparency, compromise, deliberation, trying to avoid, lurching from one place to another, and especially, and that's why the war power was entrusted to Congress, because you got no incentive to do stupid wars. What do you get? Nothing. They're not going to build a monument to a member of Congress for voting on war. And so they have to be able to appreciate why institutionally, whether they like or dislike their member of Congress, it makes sense to entrust this decision to Congress. It's not like the executive branch. I serve there as well. It's all secret. Everybody's got to be on the same team once the decision is made. The feedback is nothing, which is why we stayed in Vietnam after was obviously the whole thing was ridiculously stupid. Well, you got to be on the team. And the absence of any kind of transparency, all the secrecy, the overclassification, those are bad things that make the executive branch less likely to correct itself and to go down a wrong road than the Congress branch. But they have to be able to think beyond personalities, which is what they're taught right now. Okay, you just think of who it is, they're going to save me. And because you can get a personality associated with the White House, but Congress got 535, there's not one personality there. So they dismiss that and they just look at somebody who they see on TV every day. That's wrong. That's
You're right. You're right.
Dennis, one of the examples I give, and that Bruce has given a lot also. There are a couple of examples that right now where Congress should be asserting itself, like a very strong bipartisan majority voted and declared, rightly or wrongly, TikTok is a threat to national security. Okay. And basically, the president only having a limited right to grant an extension, and granted extension only under certain conditions, which had to be advanced negotiations and a term sheet. There are no advanced negotiations. There are no term sheets. Okay. Congress passed this law. Okay. And this is an administration that says if nobody's above the law, and if you break the law, we're coming in, we're hunting you down. We are hunting you down. No one's above the law. We are hunting you down. So you have why is Congress not hunting down the president? Why is not the president hunting down and saying either can do one or two things? Either the president could sit back and say, give me the power to continue to renew this, vote on it again, vote that you made a mistake. But you know why he doesn't want that? Because he still wants to try and force a sale to a friendly person. So he still would like TikTok in the hands of somebody that's friendly to him. So this is convenient to have this legislation out there that he can then trigger whenever he wants. And meanwhile, Congress is content to do nothing. So, it's just a simple example of the Congress sitting back and saying, look, very simple. Come to us with powers and we'll vote on whether we'll give it to you or not. If not, enforce the law. Like you say all the time, if you break the law, we hunt you down.
We hunt you down. Jeffrey just gave a great account of a specific issue, TikTok, where the Congress was essentially set aside. What we and Bruce, by his consistent efforts to try to raise awareness of the role of Congress, gets parked. Check this out now. What we have here, generally and specifically, is an example of how representative government, the whole concept of representative government, is being made obsolete, but for people rising up and insisting that the person they elect to Congress do represent them. I mean, if government, Lincoln's prayer at Gettysburg was a government of the people, by the people, and for the people would not perish. Well, we're seeing that representative government perishing in the authoritarian instincts and execution of the presidency, and this is a clear and present danger to our nation right now. Congress's the impotence is is a matter of self-harm. They've done it to themselves. And why does that happen? I've been inside there for 16 years, and I'll tell you, members are afraid. They don't really know the power they have. They almost deny or annihilate their own presence by saying that, well, we can't challenge the president. We can't do this. We can't do that. Parties are organized, and then they have to figure out what's the strategy for challenging a president. And then it devolves into personalities where you got one potential presidential candidate just mocking the president instead of going into the real details about where the harm is being done to our constitutional structure. So, representative government's on the line here. Make no mistake about it.
So the question is, what do
and
we
just to, if I could advance what Jeffrey was pointing out, the issue on TikTok, there's no limiting principle. What Trump has asserted, he says, listen, Congress can pass whatever laws they want. I don't have to enforce any of them, despite the fact in Article 2, it says the president shall take care that the laws be faithfully executed. Trump is saying, really? No, I can just say I don't want to follow the law. And it's not limited there. It could be any law in the world. It could be environmental laws. It could be in laws relating to the FISA or anything else under the sun. Well, that is indistinguishable from dictatorship. I just do what I want. The Reichstag burned down. Congress hasn't burned down physically, but in terms of its authority, this is self-immolation. They sit there and do nothing.
And let me go back to the example that was also made with respect to, the war where both Bruce and Dennis pointed out. The fact is that on the one hand, the president went to war. He went to war without an actual declaration, act of war, approved by Congress. But even though he did an illegal thing about going to war, Congress still agreed to fund it, even though Congress never did an act of war. Why should I not have a right? Jeffrey Wernick as a citizen basically saying is, I'm not paying taxes because the government is spending money that was never properly appropriated. There was no the Congress is I can't impeach Congress, but the Congress is if Congress does unconstitutional things, why do I get stuck with the bill? So in 1927, there was this guy a jurist Alexander Sack, who talked about the concept of odious debt. Okay, so I don't know why me as Jeffrey Wernick cannot sit back and declare, I'm not paying any taxes to fund stuff that was not appropriated properly, and I'm not going to be responsible for paying the debt, of that's odious debt in the sense that it wasn't properly issued, because there was never a proper appropriations process, on this, but unfortunately, what recourse do the people really have outside of elections if the people they elect in both in the legislative branch and the executive branch we just decide to breach the Constitution and breach it with apparent impunity and immunity? What can the citizens do? Why don't we have standing? Why can't I go to court and say I'm not paying these taxes? Okay, I'm not going to be responsible for this debt. This is odious debt. Okay, it wasn't issued properly. No debt that is debt that has intergenerational transfer should ever not be considered odious debt, and we should just renounce the debt. Okay, we should have that power, but who determines whether we have standing or not? The courts. Okay, but the courts really don't care about our liberty. They don't really care about our freedom. They don't care about if the people elected for office, end up doing something that breaches the Constitution. At the end, if we go to court and we want to challenge, they'll say, well, the only place you have a right to challenge is in the ballot box. If the people you vote for then don't do the job they're supposed to do and you don't replace them, too bad. I mean, that's pretty much the system now.
And how does that not feel coordinated? You know what I mean? Like it's very clearly leading into one concentration of power. And how many of you? Well,
we are seeing an interesting revolution, peaceful, in Washington D.C. because maybe Piero's getting the message with these prosecutions where they're getting the grand juries that just said, we're not prosecuting based upon this base. So we're seeing some sort of nullification on the part of people in DC who just say, you bring this crap up where, someone throws a sandwich and you basically want to treat them and give them the death penalty for throwing a Subway sandwich at a cop. No, we're not giving the death. Come back with a reasonable charge. Don't come back with somebody threw a sandwich at a cop and you want to give them the death penalty. Okay.
That's what I mean.
No, come back to us. We are starting to see some people fighting back.
I love to
through
see
at least that way of nullification, of just going and saying, I don't care. You can come and cite all the laws you want. Okay. It's unjust. So you might be right on the law, but we don't care that it's right on the law. It's unjust. Come back to us with something just. Don't use the criminal code as a weapon. Okay. Use it for the purpose of justice, not to weaponize it against people you don't like. So at least we're seeing some of that in DC. I'd like to see a lot more of that,
But the framers were not ingenues, and they repeatedly said that if we don't keep an educated citizenry, the system isn't going to work. This is what Madison said: knowledge will forever govern ignorance, and a people who mean to be their own governors must arm themselves with the power that knowledge gives. And George Washington's very first State of the Union message underscored, we really have to put our resources into education. If we don't have citizens who understand the process, the system isn't going to work. Well, we haven't satisfied that hope or expectation. We don't teach anything anymore. Remember, we can't really expect representatives to act in ways that are totally disparate. They don't have to be echo chambers of the citizens, but there has to be common values about how the process is supposed to work. And it doesn't even exist anymore. I mean, the whole idea that we had uniformly at the outset, due process, we don't take action against anybody unless they're notified, they have an opportunity to respond, and there's evidence. We don't due process out the window today. You just pick somebody up, send them into a dungeon in El Salvador, and then decide afterwards, well, we can't do anything to correct our mistake. And that's why in the Declaration of Independence, it sets forth a threshold. It says when a government has become clearly an opponent, an adversary of liberty, then you have a right to change the dispensation. It says it's not a low barrier, it's a high barrier. Because whenever you overthrow or change this form of government, bad things can happen too. But ultimately, Jeffrey, that's what the Declaration of Independence says. And it identifies 27 grievances against King George III. That threshold is enough to show that he's out to reduce us, to serfs on a plantation. We have a right to our own independence. And they did it only after years and years of pleading through the peaceful political process to the parliament and to the king, and had none of their grievances answered, and said, okay, we've had it. We have to cross this Rubicon, if you will. But that's really what we have. If the system is so debased internally, it doesn't produce anything other than despotic government or idleness in the face of despotism. We have to think about, okay, we got to go back to a larger design. It's something that's very reluctantly done, because oftentimes horrible people come to the fore when they see power vacuums, and this is our chance. But if the system otherwise is granting no relief, but you pointed out the grand jury does show sun signs of protecting liberty, the Declaration of Independence says we have a right to start anew.
Well, see, and this is the larger point. I was saying what Jeffrey was speaking, that, we do have that, but that's been taken away from us, right? Like a lot of these things have, jury nullification, like things we don't even talk about, that we have elements that we're able to insert, our ability to change these things, but they've been taken from us. And again, I feel like this has been a coordinated thing. At some point, there was an awareness of power shifting. And these actions have been slowly taken over a slow period. It's been rapidly increasing now to where, so it comes back to this larger point. Like we have solutions. Like here's how we need to educate people. We need to learn the constitutional realities of it. But there's been blocks that have set to make this impossible to get to. Not that we shouldn't be trying, but this is where I come to the idea of things like, go ahead, Dennis, go ahead.
No, Ryan, to follow up on what you said is a very important point. And that is what has been in place to frustrate the workings of a truly representative government? And I think that one of the things we have to look at is Supreme Court decisions in cases like Buckley versus Vallejo, Citizens United, which equated money with free speech, that then turned the Congress into an auction house,
Right. Exactly.
where the decisions are go to the highest bidder or the highest contributor.
That's exactly where I was going with the lobbying. Go ahead. Continue.
Yeah, that's back to you, Ryan. I mean, that's
well, that's just. I mean, this is where kind of building on that idea that, and I'm so glad you connect that dot perfectly to where you get this point now where lobbyists, foreign influence internally, are actively buying at the high, who they want and what they want to happen. And I think that that's where we are now, where with what we're presenting and the ideas we think can and they really can change people's minds and put things on the right track, that system that's built around this, I think, is effectively nullifying any effort to change those things because that money always supersedes. So it's not that we're giving up because of that, but it's like evolving the way we look at how these things need to change, because we all agree that needs to happen. But if we know that that's in place to stop that from happening, what's the solution for that? Like, that's where my mind goes today. And I don't have an answer to that, but it's like there's a massive system of outside influence that is and internally from the, different groups that are stopping any real change from happening because they're all benefiting from the status quo. So how do we deal with that problem?
Yeah. But I think the difference is that at some time, the citizenry was more awakened. And we had amendments to the Constitution that changed things. You can change bad decisions of the Supreme Court by constitutional amendment. I mean, Dennis may remember there was a decision that said that Congress couldn't change the electoral eligibility for 18-year-olds in state elections. And that amendment, the 18-year-old voting rights amendment, I think, Dennis, that got ratified in 13 weeks. The attitude was if we can send them to go die in some jungle in Vietnam, they got a right to vote.
Right.
So it can't happen, but you got to have an awakening. You got to have people who aren't brain dead and feel that as citizens, they have obligations, not because they're going to be taken to court if they sit and idle, but because they feel that's what it means to be an American. You have to have some willingness, to be selfless and get involved, even if it's not immediately beneficial to yourself. And that that ostracism, if people didn't act that way, they'd be ostracized. There's no ostracism anymore. Nobody suffers any kind of social discredit or anything, no matter how horrible they are as a human being. I'm not in favor of Savonarola, but you can be short of Savonarola and just say, listen, you're just not acting like an American ought to act. And maybe they try to think again. That doesn't exist today.
It does in the reverse, though. They get ostracized for not towing the line these days within the party lines, right? Like it's the same thing. But
when I talk in reverse, in reverse, the Thomas Massey phenomenon.
Right.
When I speak to people, I'm constantly trying to shame them, and doesn't work. But I'm not going to stop trying to do it. And what's the basis of the way I try and shame people? It's just very simple. Okay, I don't know how anyone thinks it's moral to pass on intergenerational debt. Why should I benefit at the expense of other people who have no voice, no vote yet, and basically decide I want money spent for my benefit, and I'm passing the bill on to a future generation? Why anybody should think that the government should be bigger than our willingness to pay for it? So I think now, what's in the past, when we had World War I, World War II, whatever people think about it is the government went out, issued war bonds. People were enthusiastically buying these war bonds because they thought it was a patriotic thing to do. Okay, I don't think many people would have bought war bonds. If you would have gotten Bush to go around the country saying, let's go to war with Iraq, buy these war bonds, be patriotic. I don't think many Americans, I think in Afghanistan or all the wars, yes, issued war bonds now so I can go attack Venezuela. So let me raise money specifically so I can go to war. Give me money so I can take back the Panama Canal. Give me money so I can go into Greenland and take over Greenland. Okay, nobody would write these checks, okay, to do anything. What's happened now, we now have a situation where we have government spending growing while we're cutting taxes on people. We keep on reducing how many people have skin in the game. When Ronald Reagan was elected president, about 25% of the people 75% of the people paid an income tax. Now we got half the people paying an income tax, maybe even less than half the people paying an income tax. So what do we tell people? We want to spend a lot more money. We want to give a lot more money away. We want to do a lot of other things. But meanwhile, don't worry, you don't have to pay taxes on tips, and you don't have to pay taxes on this, and we'll give you all these extensions, and we'll give you all these benefits, and we'll give you all this stuff. So basically, the government has paid people off to basically decide, hey, this isn't a bad deal for me. The government is not asking anything of me. So, and I care about my kids, so the government is going to take care of me in the sense of that that I don't have to, my kids won't have to pay an inheritance tax, so I don't care about anyone else. And this is the society that we have. I think Dennis had a time limit, so I think Dennis said he's going to sign off now. But Bruce, you and Ryan and I can continue. And Dennis, while you're signing off, Dennis, last words before you sign off.
Well, we talked about ostracism, and in some ways we have an ostracism where people's heads are buried. They don't want to look at what's happening. They don't want to recognize that we're moving towards something that's profoundly anti-democratic and anti-republican in the truest sense of the word.
Right.
So we're in a moment of change, and our country's being redefined, and people need to, as Bruce has said repeatedly, be awakened to the dangers that exist. And I think that the public's response to things like kidnapping individuals off the streets and renditioning them to countries, and the going and attacking other countries without Congress saying anything, the president declaring that he can basically kill anyone he wants abroad. People are starting to wonder where we're going with all this. And I think that it's reflected in the president's declining approval rating. It's not only about the economy, it's entwined with the sense that we're losing something that is precious to the very nature of what it means to be an American. So thank you for giving me an opportunity to participate, Jeffrey, Ryan, and Bruce, and I look forward to joining you again. Thank you.
Thank you, Dennis.
So I want to, I was at last Thursday at a friend of mine founded this organization called Intelligence Squared, and then has now rebranded it called Open to Debate. And one of the things they had was like Oxford style debates, but they've changed the format and so much. So they had a debate on the 4th of September, and the topic of the debate was, should the U.S. Be ruled by a CEO dictator? So they had, now, why did they have, and they told me the CEO of Open to Debate is a friend of mine, and the founder of this whole series, First Intelligence Squared, then Open to Debate, is also a friend of mine. So, so I've been a minor donor to the organization for, a long period of time. And so they had this guy they introduced. I'd heard his name mentioned, but I just met him briefly at the venue, Curtis Yarvin, and they had this Curtis Yarvin on because basically he's somebody that has the ears of Elon Musk and J.D. Vance. So apparently he's a voice of influence in this circle who believes in the concept of the U.S. being ruled by a CEO dictator, and who was arguing against it. A friend of mine, Glenn Wheel, and he wrote a very interesting book, two books that he's written. One recently, I forget the title of it, and the other one is Radical Markets that he co-authored with Eric Posner, the son of Richard Posner, and he argued against it. Glenn took a tact that I think was okay for an educated audience, but for an audience that is not so educated, I don't think his attack was necessarily the wisest, in my opinion, because he basically let Curtis do most of the talking, and he thought as people listened to Curtis, people would see how weak the arguments were, and that people would be dissuaded by it. but actually Curtis made some compelling points for somebody who doesn't. If you don't probe further, you don't get to expose the weakness of the points that he made. So sometimes if you leave his comments, unresponded to, then people might think that they're more worthy of merit than they really are, because they've gone unchallenged. So I don't think Glenn, challenged as much as Curtis is, as I would have done if I was up there debating Curtis. But the point of it is, why did Open Debate have this series? Had this series because there is a growing movement in the country that people find this appealing. I mean, This is the problem. The problem is that people do actually. So when you bring up the Constitution, the problem is people do find this concept of our system hasn't worked. So they're looking for somebody who will make their life. They're looking for the savior. They're looking for this CEO dictator. And so I think it was important that they did this debate, because you can't hide from an issue that's actually becoming an issue. And the fact is that the favorability rating of a constitutional republic is going down. So people want alternative forms of governance, and it seems to be part of the alternative forms of government is instead of the type of stalemate that we have of two parties that are about 50-50, constantly offsetting each other and checking each other, is they want somebody to be unchecked and uninhibited to do the things they think that respond to their wishes, desires, needs, wants, or whatever. So they find this appealing. People saying, gee, it's all right to put the military in, and clean up DC. There's been no murders, so let's do this everywhere. Of course, nobody looks at the cost of this. That's costing over $1 million a day, and nobody's figuring out who's going to pay for this, because everybody wants the free lunch. So there
has been murder.
Everybody views all this as a free lunch, and that there are no trade-offs involved. And when they don't understand that all these decisions have trade-offs, and that basically, every municipality, every state, every jurisdiction, they can't issue debt, they can't print money, so they have to reasonably balance their budgets. And so they have to meet the competing needs and demands of the people who live in their jurisdiction. And there are trade-offs in every decision they make. People think the federal government can almost operate without any of those trade-offs, because it can print money and issue debt. And apparently people think it can issue an infinite amount of money and an infinite amount of debt. And therefore there's almost no trade-off involved, in any decision they make. So
if I could jump in on this point, I think this is really important, actually. If you could bring up this article really quickly, this is just something we've shared on Last American Vagabond. The whole Curtis Yarvin overlap to this. This is the whole Freedom City, Prospera. Like this is a very clear, larger agenda. And I'm so glad you bring this up. I'd love to see that debate, because I'm very much on the side of with you. I think, Jeffrey, that this is a large problem. Like this whole philosophy is wildly unconstitutional, but that's something that's not hidden. Like you're saying, this is the solution to the failure this was. And the understanding to start with is this idea, this philosophy, which is like, this is like the whole Machiavellian Napoleon quote Trump puts out. That's where this stems from, right? That they're like you said, even the Nixon quote, like if they do it, it's not illegal. Is that this is the inter-circle elitist mindset. It's not necessarily very popular amongst the average people. It's very popular amongst the power structure. And so it's like trying to fold this in with this understanding. And so what's really alarming is that this is so Teal and I think it's Pronomos Capital are like this huge funding background between pretty much every location you can find of these so-called freedom cities, even though they're very much not libertarian and not freedom cities in any sense. And Prospera, which I think it originally tried to keep as like a separate concept, is the same funding, the same backing, Mark Andreessen, Peter Thiel. And so I think these are trial balloons for what they're trying to roll out in this country. And DC potentially was floated as one of those original spots of trying to transition that into somewhere where the kind of Thiel universe takes over and turns it into that first location. And interestingly enough, they're already beginning to do something funded by the same people in Gaza. That's just, if we want to get into that, it's an interesting conversation. But the point is, all around the world, this is something that seems to be driven in based on where you started with that, Jeffrey, that it's like, we failed, so here's how we can run the country like a business. But it is authoritarian. Just look at places they've done this, like Prospera, or even weird overlaps with El Salvador, where these same sentiments have been adopted and are not working for the average people, but sure as hell work for the power structure.
Yeah, but see, that's why I call what we've done is a counter-revolution against July 4th, 1776.
Right.
And let's go slow because people don't understand. On July 4th, 1776, 56 signatories signed their death warrants because they were insisting on protecting unalienable rights, because we're human beings, to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, government by the consent of the governed, right? And so the goal, our existence here, everybody has equal dignity to try to develop their faculties, march to their own drummer. That is success. Success isn't a palace. It's, if someone wants to spend their life strumming a guitar, fine, as long as you do it a peaceful way. Other people want to make money, that's fine. But the greatness, the idea, the revolution of 1776 was a revolution of thinking, hey, we're all endowed, every human being, with unalienable rights. That's a dignity factor here, right? And we don't care. We don't want to live under a platonic guardian who may be great, but makes us feel like we're children forever. And they tell us what to do. That's what's been lost. I don't want a CEO. I want to make my own mistakes. Right. I want to be a human being that grows and struggles and finds my faculties and rewards as a mature human being. I don't want to just to wake up and say, oh, well, I have food and I've got clothing and shelter. Okay, now you can treat me as a robot. I don't care. That was the revolution of 1776. That was the concept that our glory is liberty. Our glory isn't necessarily a GNP. Our glory certainly is not dominating the world. Our glory is liberty. So everyone gets to pursue their own ambitions. They can change, consistent with the rule of law. And this goes back to this. It sounds like they're just the modern form of Platonic guardians, but they're business people. Plato wasn't a business person. And I wouldn't accept that no matter what. I said, I don't care whether you got the smartest person, the most angelic in the world. I'm living my own life. I'm not surrendering it to you. You're not a saint. Neither am I. We got to struggle with it. And that's the stupidity I find so calamitous about this idea. Don't you understand? We were built upon the idea of Athens, Socrates, not Sparta. That was the concept. That was the ethos of the United States of America. And we've totally lost that. I mean, I can't believe we couldn't find 56 who would sign the Declaration today. We couldn't find the Minutemen at Old North Bridge, to fight off the British with then the largest power in the whole world. That's how far our culture has decayed. And we have permitted it to decay through the educational system, through the raising kids and not teaching them, hey, you got to grow up. What's important is wisdom. What's important is courage. What's important is kindness and generosity. No values, nothing anymore. I don't know how you can. There's no DNA to make the system work anymore.
What's important on this is what I see this as is technocracy. And this is an old idea that's been around since the 70s and before, in a long time before that, in a lot of other ways, that has in earnest been rolled out. And we've seen this Technocracy Inc. It's a very public conversation. So this is contingent on us believing the way we're governed, or if some of us like me feels that we shouldn't need to be governed, that's a failure, like we're talking about. This is why this is important to understand that this is a larger growing concept of the elitist kind of technocratic structure. That's Peter Thiel. That's the inner circle. And they need us to feel that way for this to happen. And so it's everything you're saying, Bruce. And it's just my added point is that this is not just some kind of organic failure of us to see the field. It is a coordinated effort, in my opinion. This is, I see it, and to your point about liberty, you gave me a really interesting way to think about this just now, is that, so, on that point of us being engineered to feel, and maybe some people feel we have failed in this experiment of America. It's interesting. If you think of it the way you framed it, there's no failure. It's not even in that conversation. It's just that we have, it is liberty, and which in your liberty, you make your own choices. You have your own failures. It's about us being able to make those choices for ourselves. And so within that path, there's no failure in that context. It's just people making choices for themselves. So it's interesting if you think of it that way, is that, this idea that we failed is only with the idea that they're somehow a corporation who didn't succeed in their outcome. It's really interesting when you think of it that way.
But it's really completely, I think, dangerous thinking. Maybe that's the wrong terminology. But the fact is, anybody with half of a brain recognizes we were made, the species is made of crooked timber. like Kant said, right? It's never going to be perfect because human beings are imperfect. Right. So these PCOs say, oh, well, it's imperfect. Well, true enough, because we're human. To err is human, right? To acknowledge error is divine. They think because it's imperfect, they're going to try to have a cure that they don't recognize is worse than the disease. If your cure for making sure nobody ever makes an error is to become a tyrant, no, I don't want to be a tyrant. I'll make the error. I'll live with that. Is it paradise? No, but it's sure better than the alternative, like living like a slave on a plantation. They don't understand that. I mean, any parent knows that in 5 seconds. Kids growing up, they want to make their own mistakes. Even if the parents are flawless, they need to grow by themselves. They feel dignity. They rebel if you're suppressing them. That's part of that's part of being a human being. These people don't want human beings anymore. And I say part of this, right, I believe, comes from their species narcissism. They believe, oh, no, we can make the species, we can reform the DNA so we're perfect angels. You're not going to do that. No. And because they have these species narcissism, they believe, okay, we can turn this into paradise, before you actually go to heaven after. And it's a complete disaster. You can guarantee you it's going to turn into a reprise of the decline and fall of the Roman Empire that Gibbon chronicled.
Yeah. Well, as a reminder to people, to reinforce Bruce's words, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights. Last I heard, Trump was not our creator. I don't think so. Maybe MAGA will insist Trump is, but I don't think so. That among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Pursuit of happiness. No guarantee of happiness. We have the right and freedom to pursue it. It's our responsibility. No third party's responsibility. We among them, and our inalienable rights that come from our creator, okay, not from government, okay, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. So that whenever any form of government becomes destructive to these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. So again, what was the goal of government? As Bruce said, life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, okay? And Bruce always said, not about my job is to maximize GDP, okay? Well,
and the big part in there, Jeffrey, that we've all mentioned more than once is, and this is going back to the point you said before, is that this is a part that at least hit in the origin point that we do have power as individuals to say, well, we don't believe that you're following through with your promises or acting in the interest of all of this, and so we can alter or abolish it. But clearly, we all know that's not the reality today. Even the idea of altering it, like you're framed by left or right as being like a terroristic kind of element. If you even bring something like that up, it just shows you that change.
And now let's go to the preamble of the Constitution. Yeah. We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice.
Yeah.
Justice.
Justice, right.
Justice.
Okay? And more perfect, not perfect.
Ensure domestic tranquility. Provide for the common defense, not offense, not war. Defense, not offense, not war, defense, okay? Promote the general welfare, and Madison wrote a lot about really what that meant and not intention for the government to create a welfare state. And secure the blessings of liberties to ourselves. Secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, our offspring. Do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America. Okay. Justice, liberty, tranquility, common defense when we are threatened. Not that we go overseas and threaten other people. Okay. When there's a direct and imminent threat to us, then we act together. If there's not a direct, imminent threat, we as long as people are leaving us alone, we leave them alone. We don't go out and we don't shoot out boats that we claim without any evidence other than a picture that says, oh, there's some barrels there. So basically those few barrels of supposedly whatever drugs that was supposedly be transported from Venezuela on that little motorboat was going to go and basically, I guess, destroy the whole United States, and they were going to circulate drugs there in the United States. So we could just shoot down anything. And again, no evidence was presented, but of course they say so. And of course they can say whatever they say. Like,
Right.
going back to this issue that Ryan will get to now is how did they describe Garcia, how they continue to describe Garcia, Abrego Garcia, in a way that they won't necessarily describe in any legal filings, of Tren de Aragua was a threat to national security. Every country that has a trade deficit, even if you have a trade surplus to the United States, you would still, trade deficit, if U.S. even had a trade surplus to you, you still were deemed a threat to our national security and our economic security. It seems like anyone that breathes is a threat to our national security, and is a claim for executive action, and that executive action doesn't require, because the executive action is done by the president, nobody can second guess it, and no evidence is required. It just needs to say, this person's a terrorist. I shot them because this person's a terrorist. I have immunity, and nobody can judge me because I made the statement that this was a national security threat. And anytime I make that statement, that's an uncontestable statement. That's a statement that's uncontestable, that no third party has the right to challenge my statement, because I'm president with absolute powers. Once I make these statements, nobody else has the right to judge the veracity of any of these statements.
Yeah. And one thing I think that's important, Jeffrey, it's kind of a cosign of the preamble, is that the preamble assumes that peace is the default position, right? Because we're trying to provide for the common defense, that peace is the ordinary condition. And in order to change from peace to war, Congress has to act. The second thing that's critical here, I believe, is that the whole concept of the Constitution was about making the ultimate sovereign power with the consent of the people. We give temporary authority over our liberty to government that we can retrieve at any time we want. They are stewards of our liberty. That's why they're there. Government by the consent of the governed. And notice that in the Declaration, it says the governments are formed for what's the purpose? To secure our unalienable rights. That's right. The reason for government, and it doesn't go beyond that. It's the beginning and the end of government. And it's so warped today. They think, no, well, government is everything. We're kind of serves. You should serve the government. No, the government needs to serve us. The government needs to serve us in our opportunities to march to our own drummer, consistent with the rule of law, giving proper respect to others who act in a way that is peaceful, even though we may disagree. All I say is that if the framers who sat in Philadelphia in 1787 returned today and looked at the United States, they wouldn't recognize it. Right. They would say, I'm looking at King George III. This is the British Empire that we declared independence from. Our handiwork is all dissolved.
Well, speaking about empire and like you often point out that that's the opposite of what we should be doing. But I would like to talk about Venezuela if you guys like to get into that for a second.
Yes.
Like the boat in particular, because I wanted your guys' take in general. And like obviously we all agree, I would imagine, that this was wildly illegal. Everything about it was opposite of what we think, international norms. But it is actually a very important case beyond even just international waters, and especially since you can overlap this with Hegseth, who just publicly said he has the authority to kill drug dealers at any time, anywhere. Yeah. And then you find out that the international drug trade is actually conducted in context of the United States by U.S. citizens. And so that becomes a very interesting point of, well, then he just said he can execute a U.S. citizen if they're trafficking drugs. But so go ahead. And I want to get into this about the legality of the international law.
Ryan, let me just jump in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, go ahead.
He says, if they're trafficking in drugs, how do you know unless you have proven in the court of law? Right. Exactly. You don't establish a fact by announcing it on Mount Kilimanjaro. They got to have evidence. And that's what makes this so dangerous. They don't understand. just by shouting something doesn't make it true.
Oh, I think they understand. I think they're doing the same thing they did with the immigration point, which is they just yell what they want you to think and then just hope and then demand that you challenge them, right? So it's the same. Whether or not these people, like to your point, if these were drug traffickers, it still doesn't change that it's illegal for them to act without proving that.
Even if they were, but that's why I go back. You remember we had at least one experiment with that. It's called herding 120,000 innocent Japanese Americans into concentration camp. We had a perfect record, 120,000 errors. When you don't do due process, you get it wrong almost 100% of the time without due process. I remember after Timothy McVeigh had blown up the Oklahoma City buildings there. Oh, it must have been a Muslim, Jordanian Muslim. It has to be a Muslim, right? So we're looking around Muslims to arrest. It was a white Anglo-Saxon American who did this. But that shows the importance of process, due process. We could be wrong. We've abandoned that. We've abandoned the most civilized trait in the history of the world. Being cognizant of the fact that we can make errors. We got to make sure that we test things out before we act, especially take lives. And these guys say, no, that doesn't matter. Despite all of the voluminous evidence showing when you don't do process, you get it wrong over and over and over again.
But this is the whole crux of the point is that this is what they're trying. They know that, right? This is their effort to try to push all of us into accepting that they're right, regardless of that doesn't matter. They said it. Therefore, that is the reality, right? The president does it. It's not illegal. And so it's a really alarming encroachment. And then again, my point was to overlap that with the idea that, okay, it starts with, well, the bad boogeyman, terrorist, drug dealer, and then eventually becomes, well, there's a middle ground in there. Well, it turns out he was an American citizen. Well, it turns out he wasn't really moving the drug, and it opens that door just like it did with the immigration point, where now he's going, well, maybe Americans too. It becomes this rampantly lawless, whatever the might makes right scenario. I'd like to play a quick video, actually, if you can bring this up for me, Jeffrey. This is something I just saw this morning. Now, what's so interesting about it's General Laura Richardson.
I talked to my number two.
What she's talking about here is that ultimately, and we've seen this before. They've made the same statement that the interest of the lithium and other things in what they call the lithium triangle is a national security interest. Well, who cares if it's somebody else's? All right. So this is where I think this comes into play in part with what we just saw, that they're just trying to rationalize that what they need for whatever they rationalize as their interest is now an absolute national interest. We can go to war over it and so on. And we're all familiar with this.
Adversary in the region, Russia. I mean, I've got of course, the countries, Cuba, Venezuela, and Nicaragua with Russia relationships. But why this region matters, with all of its rich resources and rare earth elements. You've got the lithium triangle, which is needed for technology today. 60% of the world's lithium is in the lithium triangle: Argentina, Bolivia, Chile. You just have the largest oil reserves, light sweet crude, discovered off of Guyana over a year ago. You have Venezuela's resources as well, with oil, copper, gold. We have the Amazon, lungs of the world. We have 31% of the world's fresh water in this region too. I mean, it's just off the charts. We have a lot to do. This region matters. It has a lot to do with national security. And we need to step up our game.
Wow. I honestly find it really telling that she actually seems to have deliberately left off the massive lithium that's in Venezuela. But either way, I mean, that speaks for itself, right?
No, it's such an absurd idea there. All these minerals. Well, and Jeffrey would know best because he's been in the business world certainly more than me. If you have a demand and you have a supply, don't worry, it's going to happen. We see that with drug trafficking, right? So all these efforts, they think, oh, well, they're going to cut off. OPEC wasn't going to sell us any oil after the Yom Kippur War or whatever. We ended up with oil anyway, because it just gets away in an indirect fashion. Because there's a demand. People naturally want to make money, no matter whether they're Muslim or Hindu or Jewish or Christian or Protestant or anything else. And if people want it, they'll pay for it. So the transaction's going to happen anyway. So it's utterly ridiculous to think, oh, all these minerals are going to stick them in the ground and they won't sell them to us. Are you ridiculous? All right, let me do a little bit of a diversion. So I remember this goes back to Rhodesia, still white supremacy there in 1960s. And so there was going to be a very, very large international gathering in in the capital of Rhodesia. I think of Harare at the time, but Salisbury, I think then. Anyway, Ian Smith was the white racist and anti-communist, but he rented out his quarters to Fidel Castro, right? Because he got money from it. Right? So you have Ian Smith, they were breaking the embargoes, and he's renting out to Fidel Castro. That's what human beings do. So all this idea, well, Chile won't sell us any lithium, Venezuela won't sell us any oil. Listen, they're eager to do it. It'll happen directly or indirectly. So this is the biggest bogus crap I've ever heard in my life. And they say that one of the clearest examples was the so-called oil embargo after Yom Kippur War. No, oil didn't stop the United States. It just went through Minutemen. I remember, maybe Jeff remembers too, Jimmy Carter, he was going to impose a wheat embargo on the Soviet Union because of Afghanistan. All that happened was Spain and Argentina tripled their purchases from the United States and sold them to the Soviet Union. It didn't have any impact whatsoever. So this is it's fear-mongering. It's utter stupidity. And if you're really dumb, you may believe some of this crap.
But
it's
what
ridiculous.
I think it's really about, and I think we probably agree on this, is I agree with you. It's not really that they think that's what they think. It's that, they want to be the channel through which this moves. They don't want it to circumvent the U.S. government's control structure, right? They want to use it. They want to benefit it. They want to, like anywhere else, like
military industrial complex.
Yes, exactly. They want this to funnel through how they can abuse it, like with Iraq or anything else. And ultimately this is what I see. My personal opinion is that what she's framing right there is that like through what you're kind of using, Bruce, is that they are, maliciously keeping their resources from our use. It's kind of how they're framing it. But people fall for this stuff. Like, we need this because AI and China, it's again, it goes back to education. It is a real problem, but it's important to see that that's what's happening. And they just murdered people, maybe not even gang members, let alone that they want to call them terrorists,
Yeah, well, how do you know that they're gang until you have a trial? You're not. That's a fundamental element of civilization. Presumption of innocence. We don't let somebody be found guilty of a crime because someone stands up and says you're a criminal. You have to have due process. How do you know that they're criminals until you have due process?
Right, but
and that's, my view is
the
this
entirety of the world have due process.
We basically, when I read about that, and basically this is the Godfather in the White House, right? He picks out who he wants to kill. You're done. No trial, nothing.
Right.
Really? This is life imitating art, or taking art to a new, worse level. This is what dictators have been doing from the beginning of time. You just disappeared people.
Right. I just saw a video. This is happening a lot, actually, it seems, in certain cities like New York and others, where people who are protesting in particular, what they're doing are just getting grabbed by, we've seen it a lot so far since this, before, but started a lot since this push. Masked men, no identification, unmarked cars, just yanking Americans into cars. And, in the case that I was looking at, apparently they were just dumped out somewhere 2 days later, but they were held for no charge, and there's no identification. I mean, that some Americans seem to act like that's not a problem, but it's this. So whether they were let go or not, that's not who we're supposed to be. It violates all sorts of laws and constitutional rights. It is alarming. It's the Gestapo.
It is the Gestapo. I mean, what we need, you remember the Mikado, Gilbert and Sullivan? I've got a little list, and none of them would be missed. At least they tried to ridicule that. Today, it doesn't even amount to ostracism. You can't even write satire about it. It's reality.
Right.
I said, this is ridiculous. Every day I go back and read more about Caligula and Nero and Claudius and say, my gosh, we've regressed 2,000 years. We're back into the era of the Roman emperor.
It may, just a thought that jumped into my head, it may well be that this is sort of if what I think is happening is going on, that there's an effort to rationalize in a very real core sense that we need something new, and that's what that feels like right there, that none of this will work. We need a new path, and that's why I do feel like I was mentioning before, like you brought up Curtis Yarvin and that philosophy. He's it's very clear how much that's pervasive amongst this inner circle, but then you have to overlap that. So if they have this mindset, might makes right, that if it's not wrong if we do it in the interest of America as they see it. And then you stand back and overlap that with the unparalleled Palantir surveillance system that's been laid over this country, the lack of privacy, these using of information, the constant biometrics and facial scans and all these different things that are happening. it's an alarming overlap. And so it's like, I think this is being placed in front of us, and we're getting, okay, it's because of illegal immigration, or because foreign countries want to hurt you, or we're going to beat China in the race. It's all the same solution. And that's just how I would read that. I think it's
need to sell fear.
Exactly.
Yeah. Fear. So, the Japanese are going to take over the United States with their economic power. At one point in time, I think the Tokyo stock market, the Tokyo real estate was worth more than the whole, U.S. stock market at one point in time. Then Japan went through 20 years of depressed capital markets. So, it's usually the case. Then the petrodollar and the Arabs are going to buy up the country. Then the Chinese are going to buy the country. The immigrants are going to take over the country. Nicaragua is going to overthrow our government. Okay. So
no, Silicon Valley the whole time.
On the motorboat, they had barrels of atomic weapons that they were going to come and they were going to blow up every major city. And they say all this stuff and they just keep selling fear. Yeah. So it continues to be the same model: is how do I get people to be down at the bottom of the Maslow pyramid, where people just are so worried about survival they're willing to surrender they don't care so much about pursuing liberty when they're concerned about their lives. So put people in fear of their lives and people will surrender their liberty. That's the model, and Trump is better at it than I think every other president likes that model. Only Trump is better at it than anyone else.
Yeah, well, that's exactly right. And I believe, Jeffrey, this idea of selling, the fear is because it takes brains. You have to have a critical mind in order to say the fear is fantastical. But it goes back to the Roman Empire. First, Rome fought to defend itself. Then it fought to defend allies. Then it had to invent allies to defend. Then it was always its reputation and credibility. If we didn't stop here, they're going to come here. Remember Lindsey Graham, if we're not 6,000 miles away, they'll be in South Carolina the next day. Other complete absurdities, but it works. I say most people on this program need to recognize that the likelihood, even at the time of 9/11 and today, of you dying from an international terrorist attack is less than the likelihood that you will die because a vending machine fell on your head. The risk is virtually infinitesimal. And yet people think, well, we need to surrender our liberties in order to fight this imaginary danger that's threatening us every 24 hours a day. It is absurd. But the only way in which you overcome the ability of the fear mongers to succeed is you got to educate people. Sit down, think of this through. No, it doesn't make any sense. This is not happening. And that's where our educational system is completely decayed. It doesn't exist anymore. Critical thinking. They inculcate, your sexual orientation or your, how many angels dance on the head of a pin. We don't educate people anymore. They don't know how to critically think. And we see that every day in the White House and in the media and otherwise. They don't even know what questions to ask. I don't know how you overcome that, but that's a huge problem.
Well, that's what I think that shows like this and different, this field in general, that I think, it's I think there are parents out there that are very much aware of that problem. Like, if I were to end up having children, I'd be very aware of how that, I would try to train them in different ways or teach them in different ways to see things. But I think that's what this kind of thing is here for right now. And I think a lot of people out there are starting to gravitate towards just, at least considering alternative opinions that they, might challenge the mainstream. But I think that's what this is so important for, is that people need to, there are people out there that if they hadn't come across these kind of conversations wouldn't have even considered that different point. And I just think we need more of this, all of it at the same time though, Bruce, back to your original point, we also need to be out there. If you feel like protesting makes a difference, do that. If you feel like calling your politicians make a difference, do it every day, but it has to all happen, right? It needs to be like an all encompassing thing. And the last thing I'll say to that singular point is that it's also recognizing that you're not alone out there, right? That a lot of other people out here feel the same way. It's like I said during COVID or different positions where the government made an effort to really make you feel like you were alone, the only one that saw a problem, and it really wasn't the truth. And that's it's in the interest of the power structure to always make you feel fearful and alone and in the corner and the only one that sees what's going on. And it's just not true, right? So lean into that.
Well, I agree with every word you said, but I would just add this additional element. And that is, I go back to how civilization progressed. The very first person who had nobody agreeing with him, who said slavery is bad, we have individual rights. We have no idea who that first person was, other than we know he died and he got no credit for advancing the cause against slavery. We have to have the courage to do it right, even if we are the only one. And it may take 50 years, it may take 100 years to succeed. Somebody has to start the conversation against injustice. And if it's not us, who? If not when, if it's not now, when? And I go back, that's why my hero was Socrates. Socrates, one guy out there, his stupid Athenians, the jury convicts him, the dunces. But who was rallying to Socrates? Well, he did have friends want him to escape. He said, I'm not going to do that. So we have to understand, to preserve civilization, we have to take the long-term understanding of how progress is made. Even if we get no credit, so what? We have to be confident we did the right thing, and maybe somebody else will be inspired. Otherwise, I couldn't operate, to be candid right now, because I look around in the environment. I said, Bruce, there's no way you're going to succeed. And even if nobody else does it, I said, well, if Socrates could take the hemlock, I got to do the same.
Right. I mean, I've said that so many times about, like, one part of it is we need to kind of redefine what success looks like in all this, because it may not be what we think is some watershed moment. Like, there are moments of success and incremental change, but also just that, if I recognize today that it was clear, I just knew for a fact that this would not reach what I wanted it to, I'd still do it anyway. Yeah, like you're saying. And I've said that so many times because it's just who I am. I believe in this.
Yeah, a lot of people tell me, why do I do this? I'm probably having very limited impact. I said, the point is, there's a possibility of having impact versus just giving in. Mm-hmm. So right. I'm never going to surrender, and if I don't have the impact I would hope to have, at least I know I gave my best effort to have some impact. And you never know how that impact might pay off in ways as Bruce just talked about. The first person who said, slavery's bad, somebody else might have heard that comment, who then heard it from somebody else and said, gee, we got to do something about that. So you never really know what comment that triggers somebody else, who then triggers somebody else, who then triggers something else. And then one day it might cascade. And again, nobody knows who the author was, but you just have to try, you have to give your best effort. And that's what we're each doing here every week and every day, is trying to educate people. And maybe one day there's one more person who knows something, and then another day, and then who knows, one day we might find that we don't have any impact, but somebody we touched has impact. And so, and maybe somebody has that impact. But, when I take a look at, like, again, going back to that meeting with the big tech people, just think about, one is, what statement does that make about us as a country? Yeah. That people have to go to the White House and think that's how they have. I mean, it's one thing is treating with respect. You're in somebody's home, treat with respect. But the other is just obsequious, fawning, kiss-ass behavior, like royalty. I mean, that really looked like a royal court. And it's just a complete absence of courage. And, and as I wrote, if I was there, and Trump would have gone around the table and would have said, okay, Jeff, what do you think? You have any comment? I would have dropped, my comment would have obviously been, I want to know why Elon is not here. So, if I ran a company, okay, what do you think the consequences to my company would have been at that event if that was my comment? Right. And I will think about investing in America. And once you end the stupid tariff wars, when we have free trade and capitalism, call me back when you're a capitalist country, and then I'll invest in America again. But as long as you're in a fascist country, I'm not interested in deploying much capital here. Who really would go to the White House and have the courage? I mean, I would do it. Okay, so I know I have that courage. Can I
have one point to that?
Who else would have that? How many other people would really have the courage to say that?
Well, interesting, really quickly, Jeffrey, is it so, from a business perspective, like, so I argue that these people, Gates and Zuckerberg's, clearly they see a benefit to themselves and they don't care about the principle, right? They see they can benefit. But what the real point to take away is that, like you're saying, because this is, whether you see it as fascism or whatever else, it's authoritarian, right? Is that Trump has made himself very clear that there's nothing sacred. So the moment that you say something he doesn't like, or that you go afoul of what he said that day, you don't even realize you're boxed out, right? And so that's what it looks like to work with something like that, which is why, Jeffrey, you're saying, that's not a smart move, regardless of the immediate benefit, even from a business perspective, because that's what can happen. I think that's worth pointing out.
Yeah, and it's also worth pointing out that for bullies, they sense weakness, they get emboldened to do things worse. The only thing that they fear is someone who will stand up and say, no, I'm not going to do it. I mean, just one example amongst many. You remember Tank Man in Tiananmen Square? Tank Man laid down in front of the tank, Tiananmen Square. He dared them, go crush me for liberty. They wouldn't do it. They let him alone. They bullies, they will back away if they run into a hard wall. They're ultimately cowards, but they are very skilled at exploiting weaknesses in human nature. But even if these businessmen, even for their own good, if they stood up, there'd be pushback, and Trump wouldn't try to crush them because ultimately he's weak. And that's what people don't understand. Courage. They don't understand how to deal with courage.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a very, very strong point. I've been exactly the same point. Is that a bully is somebody who's weak. I mean, the way he talks to our allies and the threats he makes is not how he's talking with Putin. Oh yes, I'm disappointed in Putin. He's not describing Putin like he describes Macron. He's not as personally offensive towards Putin as he is. He's not as personally offensive. Oh, Mr. Xi, we love each other. I don't know what's going on here. I know he loves and respects me. I love and respect him. He doesn't call them clowns like he calls everybody. Macron, a clown. Starmer, a clown. All these people, Mexico and Canada, whatever I tell them to do, they will do. Okay, this is how the type of language of how he debases people. Okay, and what's the difference? The difference is Putin doesn't give a shit what Trump has to say. Right. Mr. Xi doesn't give a shit about what Trump has to say. So, so look how he's more concerned about them than they are about him.
And to accentuate the bully point, which makes him weak, is that clearly he's doing that to countries that he knows he can get away with. So it's not strong, it's desperate, it's weak. He's like, that's why if you're in a room full of people and there's a guy pounding his chest saying I'm the strongest one in the room, he's probably the weakest one in the room. And that's what I see from Trump.
Yeah, well, that's why you see. So he'll go after Venezuela, but how come? And as though Venezuela it can't even manufacture a vacuum cleaner, but he doesn't do that with regard to Putin, Xi, where you think he's got real pushback. He runs away. Right. He just picks. I say it's like clubbing baby seals. He's very good at clubbing baby seals, but you go through a real adult, no, he backs away. Very.
Speaking about Putin now, I want to get to the point. How could anyone not think at looking at Trump and his deference to Putin? Okay, Putin's made more progress in the short period of time Trump has been president than in the several years during the Biden presidency in Ukraine. Because the U.S. withdrew its support mostly for Ukraine since Trump, and clearly, Trump has sent more signals saying that the fault is a lot more Zelensky than it is Putin's. So, given the fact that Trump ran for office in 2016, talking about disbanding NATO, and now who really knows? I mean, right now, because basically from what I've read is, NATO is buying arms from the U.S., but it's the Europeans buying arms from the U.S., and the Europeans their money is supporting Ukraine, not American money, just going through NATO. And while Trump is spending, less money on NATO, he wants Europe to put more money into NATO, and NATO looks like it doesn't really exist anymore, except in, if NATO had to work together to do something, I don't think it would accomplish that. And I think that the way probably Russia views NATO now is that NATO doesn't really exist anymore. So when he sits back and says if UK and or Germany puts troops into Ukraine, they're fair game. If the U.S. president said if they're fair game, that's attack on the United States, he might think about it. But he knows that if those troops are not American troops and he attacks NATO allies, Trump will do probably nothing. So why would not anyone not believe Trump, that Putin preferred Trump to Hillary? I mean, given everything Trump has said, he wants to just he's the greatest threat that probably was to Putin, or one of the greatest threats was a strong NATO. Okay, and a guy who was going to weaken NATO, as opposed to Hillary that would have strengthened NATO. Why would Putin not see it's in his best interest to see Trump win the election and not Hillary? Why is that even controversial?
But the other element, it seems to me, is why, again, it goes back to my opposition to empire. Number one, of course, he's a foreign government. He's going to do what he thinks is best for him. But why the hell do we care? We shouldn't even be over there anyway.
I agree with you.
Putin or whatever.
The main argument now attacking the Obama administration. Yeah. The main claim they had is not that Russia didn't try and influence, because there is pretty much bipartisan interest support for the concept that Russia did try to influence 2016, but they were unsuccessful at it. Okay,
I don't agree with that, but go ahead.
But my view, Jeffrey, I'm not disagreeing with anything you've said.
But the second point,
my argument is that it's irrelevant. Why the heck are we even? Why is this even a topic that we worry about? We should never have been in NATO anyway. So the fact is, even though your critique is absolutely accurate, I think we don't even have to have the critique. We should be back here defending ourselves. If we're attacked, then we defend ourselves.
But why the critique is relevant is that they want to make it a criminal act for them saying, for those that said that the intelligence community thought that Putin preferred Trump to Hillary, they want to criminalize that belief. That's why.
See, to me, no, I understand the absurdity. I agree with you on that relevance. I mean, it's utterly and completely insane.
It comes down to the idea of using whatever the power structure can to control speech and influence action. Like, that's what it comes down to me. But so I agree with you, Bruce. I think that should be our focus. But the point being brought up and addressing it, I think I tend to come at this from, as I've said many times, that there's more coordination than really division when it comes to the left-right paradigm and the way the government operates. So whether Hillary and Trump and Putin, I would agree with you, Jeffrey, that I think through Trump's weakness that he presents as strength, it's really weakness. I think Putin benefits from that very clearly. But from the sense of I think the U.S. government collaborates in more ways than we realize, and I think that both sides of the paradigm have continued the problem that is Ukraine. That have continued to fund it, and I think even through the funding part you mentioned with Trump. I was showing this early on that there were ways he was just circumventing the way it looked, funding that he was going through Israel that went back to Ukraine, or examples of funding that went through different channels that weren't acknowledged as much, or just the open support. I think that the U.S. government is in support of that agenda, and either way it went, it was the same way it was ultimately going to go, from left or right. That's how I would look at it.
No, but I agree with you, because what really governs our foreign policy has been, for at least Korea, but even before, it's the military-industrial complex that governs it. Eisenhower could recognize that. He really didn't push back. And so when you have an empire mentality, in order to sustain itself, it has to fantasize these fears and these dangers that don't exist. So you have to then put more money in it. It's all secret. So there's never accountability, because transparency would destroy all this if people really knew what's being wasted. And so whether you got Democrats or Republicans, yeah, you get a little bit of change in the vocabulary. But what ultimately happens on the ground, it's all exactly the same. Projecting ourselves all over the world. No one stands up and says, why do we have 800 foreign military bases? 800? All these 6 fleet all over the world? And why is our chief in Bahrain? Why the heck are we there? Nobody even asked those questions. Just assume, we need hundreds of thousands of troops abroad. Our national security perimeter is 6,000, 7,000, 8,000 miles away. No other country in the world has a defense perimeter that wide. And that what we find intolerable and challenging us. I mean, we do this all the time to other people. We turn everything. We just and the test case, I believe, was the Cuban Missile Crisis. We reacted to having these weapons in Cuba, 90 miles off. When we got 90 miles, we're less than that in our weapons pointing at other countries. We were going to take the world to the brink of extinction and use nuclear weapons. You just can't have a threat, even though at the time we had 5,200 nuclear warheads to blow up Cuba and Soviet Union 50 times over. So we react that way, and yet we project and put other people in fear far more intense than we encountered in the Cuban Missile Crisis. We say, oh my God, they must be horrible people. Why do they worry about us?
And that was a response, as most people don't really know the real story about the Cuban Missile Crisis.
Yeah.
Is that there was a lot of theater about Russian moving the missiles from Cuba because JFK stood them down. And then quietly, 6 months later, we took our missiles out of Turkey, which is what Russia wanted. They wanted our missiles out of Turkey.
Yeah.
So,
because there was 90 miles in Cuba. We had missiles in Turkey and Italy that were less than 90 miles. Right. It was like 5 minutes it would be in Moscow.
And how many examples today? How many examples of bases today that are far closer than 90 miles to other adversary locations? It's all over the world.
Yeah. And that's the point I think we're trying to make here. It's not even debatable whether you're Republican or Democrat in Congress. It just goes by. No one's even arguing. Why the heck do we have these bases there? I mean, you wake up one day and, we got some soldier killed in Mali and then Niger or Chad. Well, how did we don't even know they're there? I think we have special forces like 150 countries in the world. It's all under the table. We don't even know about it. What the heck are you doing? This is ridiculous. No, we go back to invincible self-defense. We bring them back here. You attack us, we'll destroy you. But otherwise, as Jeffrey say, we trade with you. We're not going to go to war with you. Leave us alone, and it's going to make a perfect world. But we know that's the optimal. As soon as we start going beyond invincible self-defense, we end up being an empire and destroying ourselves. We need to be smart enough to know that we can't avoid, the same fate as all these other empires. There have been 70 other empires. They all self-immolate because they don't know how to restrain themselves. And some way or other, it's like Napoleon marching to Moscow in winter, and they destroy themselves. We don't want to go down there. Use our brains.
And I would add to that too.
You think, both Ryan and Bruce, you think that this issue of these claims about, like, Trump makes, that he wants to pursue Brennan and Clapper and Hillary and Obama and all these people in a conspiracy, again, with the main claim being that the false narrative that they created was the preference of Trump over Hillary. That's their main claim. Okay.
I don't think it's happening.
Because no, let me finish.
Okay? Sorry, go ahead.
That's their main claim, okay? That they're pursuing these people, and they've called this the greatest crime, okay, of the history of American presidential election, was this election interference with this claim. Given the fact that Trump is everything about ego, okay, I think that's all it's about, is the fact is he does not like that claim that Putin sees him weaker than Hillary, okay? Mm-hmm. And so therefore that narrative he doesn't like, because he doesn't want to acknowledge that he could be a puppet to Putin and weaker, and that Putin would be more intimidated dealing with Hillary than he would with him. So I think he finds that narrative offensive to his ego, and that's why they're going after it. It's just about he's weaponizing the Justice Department over his ego, okay? Over his ego. Okay.
Which is weakness.
Yeah.
If I've ever seen it.
It's all his ego. Jeffrey, everything is his ego. There's no principle in anything. We have a government now run by Donald Trump that's as close to socialism or communism in the history of the United States. Sovereign wealth funds getting involved. The Hague says we're going to have by Lockheed Martin, the government's going to take over that. They do Intel, got a Nippon Steel. We got these special shares. No, you can't export to China unless you pay the government a 15% ransom. So what principles? There's no principle involved at all. Everything is about ego.
And think about
nothing else, and there isn't anything else but ego.
And think about the trade deals. I go EU. We're gonna invest $50 trillion in the U.S. Well, the EU government doesn't have that money to invest. So what's the method under which the EU government is going to coerce private companies to invest in the EU? What's the methodology? What are they going to pass a law saying these companies, every EU company has to now figure out a way of investing X% of their have to go to the capital markets and raise money to invest and just figure out something. Just figure out something. Just sell some money, but buy, to drill oil, do something. Really, how does that work? You make it say, what's the mechanism for enforcing that? Okay. But think about what the assumption is of the role of government. So he thinks the role of government should be to direct investment, that the government should run the economy. The government should allocate capital.
There's the CEO.
That's what he says as the CEO.
Right.
Each government should be the authoritarian CEO, and they should get the leaders in their respective offices and say, you're going to write this check and you're going to write this check, because this is his vision of how government should work.
Right.
Okay?
I unfortunately have to break off here pretty quick for an appointment, but I was just going to say that what I was saying when you were talking there is what I meant is that in regard to the going after Brenner and Cohen, I don't think it's going to happen. I think that's the floated idea to get some traction with what they're doing. But they think the grand jury is just around the corner. It's very much the same kind of QAnon military tribunal, this thing that's been floated forever that make you think it's just around the corner, saving them for last. So I definitely agree with every other part of that, though. I very much think that it's his same old petty action. But at the end of the day, the claim of who's going to go to jail for it, I mean, we haven't seen that. I can't even remember the last time, left or right, somebody in positions of power was actually held accountable. I hope so, left or right.
But that's signature Trump. Remember what he told Zelensky? You don't actually have to do anything; just announce it. And that's what he told the Justice Department. You don't actually have to do anything to investigate, just announce it. I mean, he lives in a fantasy world, He thinks that that words are reality. So that's vintage Trump, right? And I agree with you. They're not going any place because there's no evidence. They'd show up. I mean, a lawyer still would be worried. I can't walk into court, Mr. President. There's no witnesses. There's no evidence. What's going to happen here? Case would collapse in 5 seconds. It's the same way Abrego Garcia, right? They're going to charge him in the criminal case. Oh, we got all this evidence. Then he says, okay, not guilty. Okay, we're not going to charge you anymore. Going to stick you to Uganda or someplace because they got no evidence.
Now El Salvador is back on the list, by the way. I saw that this morning.
Yeah. Well,
anything but a trial. Anything but a trial.
Right.
Anything but a trial. Anything except putting them in a position where they have to prove their bullshit. Okay? Because it's bullshit. Okay. Ryan, last word, since you have to go. I guess it's also been 2 hours now. So, Ryan, your last word, and then Bruce, and then we'll say goodbye.
I especially enjoyed the conversation today. I enjoyed Dennis's addition to it, and I think that I like what we continue to do is have a ongoing kind of the conversation that is aimed at discussing the problems but trying to seek out solutions. And whether we find that in the moment of the conversation or not, I like that we're continuing to go in that direction and find ways around this, like and understand beyond just the surface level, like the bigger mechanisms through which this is happening and how we can stop it. And so I value that. So thanks again, guys.
Bruce?
Well, I always want to applaud the audience here, as well as Ryan and Jeffrey. And I want to underscore it. None of us is infallible. Don't take anything we say as gospel. Ask questions about it. If you think that there are errors, go look at it, challenge us. Always have an open mind. I say my motto is that the only love that never grows old is the search for truth without ulterior motives. We can always and never be embarrassed about changing your mind if you have new facts, but be deliberative. Always ask why before how. That's the greatest thing that you'll ever achieve in your life in becoming a wise and fulfilled person is always ask why. Why are we doing this? And then go to how.
I'd like to thank, in his absence, Dennis and Ryan and Bruce. Thank you so much, and we'll see each other next week.
Yeah.
See you next week, guys.
Okay, everybody have a great week. Thanks.